Marcus Chun pulled into the Desert Tactical Training Facility parking lot at 6:45 on a Saturday morning with his daughter, Riley, beside him, her rifle case secured in the back seat. The desert air already carried heat that would climb past 100 by noon. Riley stepped out wearing range pants and a plain gray shirt, her dark hair tied back, expression calm as she surveyed the single-story concrete building ahead. Inside the facility entrance, the registration desk sat unmanned for another 15 minutes until a man in tactical pants and a black polo shirt emerged from the back hallway. Jake Patterson read the name on his shirt, stitched above the facility logo. He glanced at Marcus first, offering a nod of recognition between former military. Then his eyes landed on Riley and stopped. "So this is Bring Your Kid to Work Day," Patterson said, his smile suggesting a joke shared between adults. Marcus placed Riley's registration packet on the desk. "She's enrolled in the advanced course. Riley Chun, paid in full 2 months ago." Patterson's smile faded into something flat as he flipped open the packet without reading it. "This course is for serious operators, not high schoolers. We run tactical scenarios under stress conditions." Riley stepped forward, keeping her voice level. "Where should I set up my rifle case?" Patterson looked past her toward Marcus. "Is this some kind of misunderstanding, Gunny? Because I'm happy to refund the registration and set her up with our basic recreational course next month." "No misunderstanding," Marcus said. "Check her qualification scores in that packet." Patterson closed the packet without looking inside. "Scores don't matter if you can't handle real pressure. This isn't a competition range where everything's controlled." The front door opened, and 8 men filtered inside carrying equipment bags, their ages ranging from mid-20s to mid-40s. They wore the casual confidence of people accustomed to being capable, voices overlapping as they discussed previous courses and compared equipment. One noticed Riley and elbowed his neighbor, whispering something that made 3 of them glance over. Patterson raised his voice to address the arriving students. "Gentlemen, welcome to Weekend Advanced Tactical. We've got a full roster today, so let's get checked in and head to the range for equipment verification." Riley walked toward the equipment area where students were setting bags down. She placed her rifle case on an empty section of bench and began unlocking it. Patterson crossed the room quickly, his boots loud on the concrete floor. "You'll observe today, for safety reasons," Patterson announced, his voice pitched to carry to the other students. "We need to verify capability before live participation." One of the students, a stocky man with a police tactical unit patch on his bag, spoke up. "Makes sense, Jake. Can't have observers in a line of fire if things get dynamic." Another student nodded his agreement while examining ammunition boxes. "Liability issue for the facility, too." Riley met Patterson's eyes without expression. "My application included completion certificates from 12 youth competitions and 3 national medals. Those verify capability." Patterson turned to Marcus. "Gunny, help me out here. You know how these courses run. We can't make exceptions that put students at risk." Marcus kept his hands loose at his sides, his jaw tight. "She qualified on paper. You haven't even looked at her application beyond her age." "Because age is the relevant factor," Patterson said, his tone shifting toward finality. "When we're running hot exercises with multiple shooters under tactical stress, I need people who've operated in real-world conditions." The students finished their equipment setup and began moving toward the exit that led to the outdoor range. Patterson gestured for them to proceed, then looked back at Riley. "You're welcome to observe from the tower platform. You'll learn a lot watching how the scenarios develop." Riley picked up her rifle case and walked toward the range exit behind the departing students. Marcus followed her, catching Patterson's arm briefly. "Her scores put her in the top 5% of applicants you've accepted this year." Patterson pulled his arm free gently. "Then she'll do great in a course designed for youth participants." "This isn't that course." Outside, the morning sun struck the desert landscape surrounding 3 shooting ranges arranged in a semicircle around a central tower. Students claimed positions at the firing line while Patterson distributed ear protection and safety briefings. Riley walked to the tower platform as directed, climbing the metal stairs to an elevated observation deck that provided a clear view of all three ranges. Below, Patterson began the first drill with instructions about target identification and engagement sequences. The 8 students moved through the exercise with varying degrees of competence, some smooth and practiced, others compensating for gaps in their fundamentals with aggressive speed. Riley watched without comment, her hands resting on the tower railing. Marcus stood at ground level near the base of the tower, close enough to observe both the range activity and his daughter above. Patterson completed the first drill and called for equipment rotation, moving students to different firing positions. He looked up at Riley once, his expression satisfied that the situation had been handled appropriately, then turned his attention back to his paying students who belonged on his range. David Morrison sat in his office reviewing registration logs when Riley Chen's application caught his attention for the second time that week. 16 years old with qualification scores that exceeded half his regular instructor staff. 12 youth competitions completed, 3 national medals in precision shooting, and a recommendation letter from a Marine Corps marksmanship coach. He stood and walked toward the range entrance, curious why he hadn't seen her on the firing line yet. The outdoor range sprawled before him with students engaged in a timed accuracy drill. Patterson moved between firing positions, offering corrections and encouragement. Morrison scanned the line twice before spotting Riley on the observation tower, standing alone with her arms folded across the railing. Morrison climbed the tower stairs and joined her on the platform. "You're Riley Chen." "Yes, sir," she said without turning from her view of the range below. "Why aren't you shooting?" Instructor Patterson said, "I should observe today for safety reasons." Morrison watched Patterson below, noting the careful attention he gave each student while ignoring the tower completely. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to Riley's application, reading through her qualifications again. "These scores indicate you've been shooting competitively for years." "Since I was 9, Riley said. "My father taught me fundamentals when I was 8. Patterson called for a break, and students moved away from the firing line toward water stations. Morrison descended the tower with Riley following and approached Patterson near the equipment shed. "Jake, why isn't Riley Chen participating in the drills?" Patterson wiped sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "Kids don't belong here, David. This is a liability issue waiting to happen." Morrison held up his phone, showing Riley's application. "She's got signed waivers from both parents and qualification scores that exceed our minimum requirements. Paper qualifications mean nothing in real scenarios," Patterson said, his voice dropping lower. "When rounds are flying and people are moving under stress, I need operators who've been tested in actual conditions." Riley approached them with measured steps, her expression neutral. "Does facility policy prohibit youth participation in advanced courses?" Morrison looked at her directly. "No, it doesn't. We require qualification scores, signed waivers, and completion of our safety briefing. You provided all 3. Patterson shifted his weight, glancing at the students who were watching from their break area. "Look, David, the other students have concerns about training alongside someone with no tactical experience. Team cohesion matters when we're running complex scenarios." Riley pulled a folded certificate from her pocket and handed it to Morrison. 6-week tactical movement course completed 4 months ago. Instructor was former Army Ranger. Morrison examined the certificate while Patterson's jaw tightened. He passed the document to Patterson, who barely looked at it before handing it back. "Civilian course," Patterson said. "Not real-world applicable for what we do here." Morrison's tone shifted toward formal. "Include her in the next drill, Jake. She's qualified and paid the same rate as everyone else." Patterson looked at the watching students, then back at Morrison. "Fine. She can run the basic marksmanship station while the others work advanced tactical movement." The students returned to the range as Patterson announced the next exercise. Riley collected her rifle case from the tower and moved to the designated basic station, a simple target array at 200 yards. The other students deployed to positions that required moving between cover while engaging multiple threat targets. Riley completed her drill in 4 minutes with every shot grouped within a 2-inch circle at center mass. Patterson walked past her target without stopping. His attention focused on the advanced stations where students struggled with the more complex requirements. One student, a lean man in his 30s with a police SWAT patch on his vest, finished his run and walked over to examine Riley's target. He studied the tight grouping for several seconds before Patterson called everyone to gather for the afternoon briefing. "Simple shots," Patterson said to the assembled group while gesturing vaguely toward Riley's target. "Anyone can make those with enough time and no stress. The real test comes when you're moving, when there are multiple threats, when your heart rate is elevated and you have to make decisions under pressure." The students nodded their agreement. Morrison stood near the facility entrance, observing the interaction, his expression unreadable. Riley cleaned her rifle with methodical attention to each component, her movements efficient and practiced. Patterson outlined the next day's schedule, describing a live tactical exercise in the facility's wooded training area. Teams of 2 would navigate through terrain while engaging opposing force members positioned at unknown distances. He assigned partnerships based on experience levels, pairing students who had taken previous courses together. When he finished the assignments, 8 names had been called, and Riley remained unmentioned. Morrison stepped forward. "You've only assigned 4 teams. That's 8 people." Patterson consulted his roster. "Right. We have a full complement of experienced students for tomorrow's exercise." "You have 9 students enrolled," Morrison said. "Riley needs a partner." Patterson's pause lasted 3 seconds before he responded. "All the teams are already balanced based on experience and tactical background. Adding a 9th person would require restructuring all the partnerships." "You have 4 teams of 2, Morrison said, his voice level but carrying an edge. "That's 8 people. Riley makes 9. Someone needs a partner." The students shifted their attention between Morrison and Patterson. One cleared his throat. "Jake's right that team dynamics matter for these exercises. We've been training together all day and know each other's movements." Patterson seized the opening. "Exactly my concern, David. Team cohesion in tactical scenarios isn't something we can improvise. Riley can observe tomorrow, and then we'll set her up with a proper partner for a future course." Morrison counted the students visibly. 8 people make 4 pairs. 9 people means someone needs a partner or someone sits out. Riley has the same qualification level as everyone here. So explain to me why she's the one observing. Patterson's confidence faltered briefly before he recovered. "She lacks tactical movement experience in real-world applications." Riley produced the certificate again. "Tactical movement course, 6 weeks, completed with honors." "That's a civilian recreational course," Patterson said, his frustration beginning to show. "We're talking about actual tactical operations under combat stress simulation." Morrison's expression hardened. "She's qualified, she's paid, and she's participating tomorrow. Assign her a partner now, or I'll do it myself." Patterson looked at his roster again, as if hoping to find a solution in the paperwork. Finally, he pointed at a younger student who had been quiet most of the day. "Derek Shun, you'll partner with Riley tomorrow." Derek's protest came immediately. "Jake, I was counting on working with Martinez like we discussed. We trained together at the last course." "Plans change," Patterson said with finality. "Derek and Riley, your team 5. Everyone meet here at 0600 tomorrow morning for equipment issue and briefing." The students dispersed toward the parking lot, their conversations subdued. Derek walked to his vehicle without looking at Riley. Several other students gathered near their trucks, glancing toward Riley while speaking in voices too low to carry. Morrison approached Riley as she packed her equipment. "I apologize for the resistance you've encountered. That's not how this facility operates." Riley closed her rifle case with practiced efficiency. "Will tomorrow's exercise actually include me, or will there be another reason to observe?" "You'll participate fully," Morrison said. "I'll be personally overseeing the exercise to ensure protocol is followed." Marcus joined them from where he had been waiting near the facility entrance. He looked at Morrison, then at Riley. "Everything resolved." "For now," Morrison said. "Tomorrow we'll demonstrate whether further intervention is necessary." Riley lifted her rifle case and walked toward their vehicle. Marcus followed, after nodding to Morrison. The parking lot emptied quickly as the sun dropped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert range where Riley's target still displayed its tight grouping that no one except the SWAT officer had bothered to examine closely. Sunday morning arrived with temperatures already climbing past 70 degrees when the students assembled in the facility briefing room. Patterson stood at the front, near a topographic map of the wooded training area that sprawled across 200 acres of desert terrain mixed with imported trees and artificial structures. Riley sat in the back row with her equipment organized beside her chair. Marcus waited outside, near Morrison's office. Patterson began his briefing by outlining the exercise parameters. Teams of 2 would navigate through the wooded area using tactical movement principles while engaging an opposing force positioned at elevated locations between 400 and 600 yards. The opposing force consisted of facility staff members armed with marking rounds that would leave visible paint on anyone they hit. Derek arrived 3 minutes late and took the empty seat beside Riley without acknowledgement. He set his gear down with more force than necessary, the thud drawing glances from other students. Patterson continued describing the scenario. Your objective is to identify opposing force positions, neutralize the threats using proper cover and concealment, and reach the extraction point on the far side of the training area. Time limit is 90 minutes. Any questions? One student raised his hand. What's the target distance range again? 400 to 600 yards, Patterson said. Elevated positions give them advantage, so you'll need to use terrain and vegetation for concealment while you work your approach. Another student spoke up. Are we scoring on speed or accuracy? Both factor into your evaluation, along with tactical decision-making and team coordination. This exercise tests your ability to operate under realistic field conditions. Riley kept her attention on the map, noting the 3 primary ridge lines that would offer optimal firing positions for an opposing force. Derek leaned back in his chair with arms crossed, his body language broadcasting his dissatisfaction with the partnership assignment. Patterson moved to team assignments and equipment distribution. Each team received a radio, extra magazines loaded with marking rounds, and a topographic map identical to the one on the wall. When he reached Team 5, he handed the equipment to Derek without looking at Riley. Derek, your team leader. Make sure your partner stays behind you during movement phases. Derek took the equipment with a curt nod. Understood. Morrison entered the briefing room and stood against the back wall, his presence drawing a brief glance from Patterson before the instructor continued. All teams will deploy at 15-minute intervals to prevent clustering. Team 1 moves out first, followed by teams 2 through 5 in sequence. The first team departed after a final equipment check. Patterson pulled Derek aside near the door while other teams prepared. Just keep her behind you and handle the actual engagement yourself. If she can't keep up, find cover and complete the exercise solo. Riley adjusted her rifle sling, her expression unchanged while the conversation happened 10 feet away. Marcus appeared in the doorway, exchanged looks with Morrison, then stepped back outside. Team 5's turn came 45 minutes later. Derek and Riley moved to the deployment point at the edge of the wooded training area. Patterson handed Derek the radio and map. Remember, Derek, you're responsible for tactical decisions. Keep your partner in safe positions. Derek keyed the radio to verify it worked, then started into the woods without waiting. Riley followed 3 paces behind, her rifle held in low ready position, her eyes scanning the terrain ahead for optimal movement routes. They covered the first 100 yards in silence before Derek stopped behind a cluster of large rocks. He turned to face Riley for the first time since they had been partnered. I'll handle the actual shooting. You stay behind cover and watch our 6. Riley nodded once without arguing. Derek moved forward again, selecting a route that kept them in lower ground between 2 ridge lines. His movement was adequate but not optimal, Riley noticed as he crossed several areas that left them exposed to elevated positions. She adjusted her own path to maintain better concealment while staying within his designated following distance. The first shots came 20 minutes into their movement. Marking rounds impacted trees near Derek's position, forcing him to dive behind a fallen log. Riley was already in cover behind a rock formation 15 feet to his right, her position naturally protected from the angle of fire. "Where are they?" Derek called out, his voice tight with adrenaline. "Eastern Ridge, approximately 520 yards, Riley said. Single shooter based on rate of fire. More rounds struck near Derek's log. He tried to locate the shooter, but the distance and elevation made visual identification difficult through the vegetation. "How can you tell the distance?" "Scope reading and terrain reference," Riley said. "There's a second shooter on the western ridge at 480 yards. The sound changed as the second shooter began firing. Derek pressed tighter against his log while rounds impacted on both sides of his position. His radio crackled with static, but no clear transmission came through. Riley observed both muzzle flashes through her scope, tracking the rhythm of their fire and the slight shift in positions between volleys. Derek attempted to return fire toward the eastern ridge, but his rounds fell short, unable to reach the elevated target from his low ground position. "We need to move," Derek said. "Can't engage effectively from here." Before Riley could respond, a third burst of fire came from the eastern position. One marking round struck Derek's shoulder, leaving a bright orange paint splatter across his tactical vest. He jerked from the impact, real enough despite being non-lethal, and his radio fell from his vest into the dirt. Derek grabbed his shoulder, his face showing surprise at the force of impact. "Jesus, that actually hurt." More rounds continued from both positions. A student from another team emerged from cover 60 yards to their left, trying to maneuver closer, when multiple rounds struck his chest and helmet. He dropped to one knee, eliminated from the exercise, then started making his way toward the designated eliminated player area. Riley could see two more students pinned in separate locations, their positions compromised by the crossfire between the two elevated shooters. Derek retrieved his radio, but the display showed damage from his fall. He tried to transmit, but received only static in response. The firing intensified. Another student took multiple hits while attempting to cross open ground toward better cover. Derek looked at his paint-marked shoulder, then at Riley, who remained clean behind a rock formation. "Okay, maybe you were right about the distances," Derek admitted. "Can you see them clearly?" "Both positions visible," Riley confirmed. "Eastern shooter is behind a constructed barrier. Western shooter is using natural rock formation." "Can you hit them from here?" Derek asked. Riley studied both positions through her scope, calculating wind drift and elevation. "Yes." Derek wiped sweat from his face. "Then take the shots. I'm already marked anyway." Riley adjusted her position slightly to get a clearer angle on the eastern ridge. She controlled her breathing, let her heart rate settle, and found her natural respiratory pause. Her finger took up slack on the trigger. "Wait," Derek said suddenly. "If you shoot, they'll know our position and focus fire here." "They already know our position," Riley said. "They marked you 30 seconds ago." Derek opened his mouth to respond, but Riley's first shot broke the silence with a sharp crack that echoed differently than the marking rounds. On the eastern ridge, a yell carried across the distance, followed by a voice shouting that his rifle had just exploded. Riley cycled her bolt and acquired the western position in 3 seconds. Her second shot followed 8 seconds after the first. Another voice called out from the western ridge, confused and alarmed, saying his weapon had malfunctioned catastrophically. All firing stopped. Derek stared at Riley with his mouth open. "What has happened?" Riley lowered her rifle and moved from cover toward the nearest pinned student, a muscular man in his 30s who had taken a round to his leg during the crossfire. He was conscious, but his face showed pain beyond what marking round should cause. Riley reached him and immediately saw the problem. Real blood soaked through his pants at the thigh. "That's not paint," Derek said from behind her. Riley pulled her first aid kit and applied pressure to the wound. She keyed her radio, but received the same static Derek's damaged unit produced. The student, whose name tag read Martinez, looked at the blood with growing alarm. "What the hell is going on?" Martinez said through gritted teeth. "Those were supposed to be marking rounds." Riley maintained pressure on his leg. They were using live ammunition. The exercise was compromised. Derek scanned the area and spotted another student on the ground 40 yards away, also bleeding from shoulder wound. "Oh God, this is real. People are actually shot." Riley called out to Derek. "Check on that student. Apply pressure if he's bleeding. I'll stabilize Martinez." Morrison's voice suddenly boomed across the training area through a loudspeaker system. All exercise participants immediately cease fire and report to central staging. Medical teams are deploying now. Repeat, cease all fire immediately. Riley kept pressure on Martinez's leg, while Derek ran to help the other wounded student. In the distance, the sound of approaching vehicles grew louder as the facility's emergency response kicked into action. Martinez looked at Riley with confusion cutting through his pain. "You just shot both of them," Martinez said. "I heard your rifle. How did you hit targets at that distance?" "I didn't shoot them," Riley said. "I shot their rifles, specifically the firing chambers, to disable the weapons without hitting the shooters." Martinez processed this information while his leg throbbed. "You hit firing chambers at 500 yards. Twice. In 8 seconds." Riley nodded while maintaining steady pressure. "My father taught me precision fundamentals. The distance wasn't the hard part. Timing the shots to penetrate the chambers during their trigger pull so their rounds would be contained was what mattered." Derek returned with the other student leaning on him for support. Medical teams arrived in utility vehicles, their response professional and immediate. Patterson appeared with Morrison close behind, both men taking in the scene of wounded students and the sudden silence from the ridge positions. Patterson's face had gone pale. "Who fired those shots that stopped the opposing force?" Derek pointed at Riley. "She did. Both rifles. 8 seconds apart. While I was telling her to wait." Patterson stared at Riley while medical teams worked on the wounded students around them. Morrison moved past him toward the eastern ridge where the first opposing force member waited with his destroyed rifle. The weapons chamber had been penetrated with surgical precision. The metal peeled back from internal pressure when Riley's round had entered during the shooter's trigger pull. Morrison examined the rifle closely, then keyed his radio. "Give me the western position status." The response came within seconds. "Same situation, sir. Chamber completely destroyed. Shooter is unharmed but shaken. Says his rifle exploded the moment he fired." Patterson walked to where Riley stood with Martinez. The medical team had taken over wound care and was preparing Martinez for transport. "You're telling me you made those shots?" Riley met his eyes without expression. "Yes. That's impossible," Patterson said. "Those were 500-yard shots under combat stress. Even experienced snipers would struggle with that accuracy." Derek stepped forward, his paint-marked shoulder visible. "I watched her do it, Jake. Both shots. I told her to wait, and she fired anyway." Both rifles went silent immediately. Morrison returned from the ridge, carrying the destroyed rifle. He set it on the ground near Patterson's feet. "Take a look at the entry point. Single round penetrated the chamber at the exact moment the shooter was firing. The opposing force member's round was contained inside the destroyed chamber instead of going downrange." Patterson crouched to examine the rifle, his professional knowledge forcing him to acknowledge the precision required. Even if she made the shots, someone should have verified the ammunition before this exercise started. This is a catastrophic safety failure. Morrison's voice dropped to a tone that carried authority. "We'll address the ammunition issue in a moment. Right now, I want to understand how a 16-year-old student neutralized both threats while your team leader was marked and pinned down." Derek spoke before Riley could respond. "She identified both positions, called out the exact distances, and told me there were 2 shooters before I even saw the muzzle flashes. When I got hit and dropped my radio, she stayed calm and took the shots." Patterson stood up from the rifle. "This doesn't change the fact that she shouldn't have been in a position where she needed to fire at all." The exercise parameters were clear. The parameters included marking rounds. Morrison said, "Someone loaded live ammunition into weapons that were supposed to be non-lethal. 3 students are wounded because of that failure." Riley's shots ended the threat before more people got hit. Martinez called out from where the medical team was securing him to a stretcher. "That girl saved my life. I was bleeding out, and she knew exactly what to do. Applied pressure, kept me calm, got help moving. A second medical team arrived with the other wounded student, Kevin Torres, who had taken a round to his shoulder. Torres was conscious and talking. Who stopped the shooting? 1 second I'm getting lit up. Next second, everything goes quiet. Morrison gestured toward Riley. She disabled both opposing force rifles with precision shots to their firing chambers. Torres processed this while the medic worked on his shoulder. The kid did that while we were all pinned down. The radio crackled and Morrison answered. Patterson, get to central staging immediately. We have a situation with the ammunition inventory. Patterson looked at Morrison, then at Riley, before heading toward the staging area. Morrison turned his attention fully to Riley. Walk me through your decision process. Riley kept her voice level and factual. Derek was hit and his radio failed. I could see 2 more students pinned in crossfire with limited cover. The opposing force was using live rounds based on the sound signature and impact patterns. I identified both shooter positions at 520 yards and 480 yards respectively. Morrison nodded. Continue. Standard engagement would risk hitting the shooters. They weren't aware they were using live ammunition based on their firing patterns and lack of caution. I chose to disable their weapons by targeting the firing chambers during trigger pull. That would contain their rounds and neutralize the threat without casualties to the opposing force. You timed your shots to penetrate during their trigger pull, Morrison said. Yes, sir. Otherwise, the round would have just damaged an inactive chamber. By timing the penetration during firing, their rounds were contained inside the destroyed chamber, and the weapon became inoperable immediately. Morrison studied her for a long moment. How long have you been training? Since I was 8 years old. My father is Marcus Chun, retired Marine sniper instructor. He taught me fundamentals, and I've competed in precision shooting for 7 years. Derek interrupted. Jake spent 2 days telling her she wasn't qualified. She just made shots I couldn't make on my best day while I was hiding behind a log. Morrison's radio crackled again. Patterson's voice came through with audible stress. David, we have a major problem. Live rounds were mixed into the marking round inventory. Multiple magazines were loaded with lethal ammunition. Morrison's jaw tightened. How did live rounds get into a training exercise inventory? Still investigating, Patterson said. But we need to shut down all operations immediately and secure every weapon and magazine on site. Morrison issued rapid orders through his radio for facility lockdown and complete ammunition inventory. He looked at Riley again. Your father trained you for 8 years. Riley nodded. 4 times per week minimum. Competitions on weekends. He taught me the same curriculum he used for Marine Scouts sniper training. Marcus appeared from the staging area path with Patterson behind him. Marcus went directly to Riley. You hurt? I'm fine, Riley said. Martinez and Torres were hit, but medical teams have them stabilized. Marcus turned to Morrison. My daughter made those shots. I know, Morrison said. I'm trying to understand how someone with her training was excluded from participation yesterday, while less qualified students were running drills. Patterson's defense came quickly. I made decisions based on age and experience. There was no way to know she had that level of capability. Her application listed 12 competitions and 3 national medals. Morrison said, his voice hardening. You dismissed her qualifications without review. Then you excluded her from exercises. Then you assigned her to a team with instructions for her to stay behind her partner. Derek spoke up again. Jake told me to keep her behind me and handle all the shooting myself. Told me if she couldn't keep up, to complete the exercise solo. Patterson's face flushed. That's standard protocol for unproven team members in tactical exercises. She was only unproven because you refused to let her demonstrate capability, Morrison said. Now 3 students are wounded because of an ammunition failure, and the only person who maintained composure and neutralized the threat was the student you spent 2 days dismissing. Marcus watched the exchange without comment. His attention split between Morrison's anger and Riley's calm acceptance of the situation. Patterson tried another approach. The ammunition failure is the real issue here. We need to focus on how live rounds entered the training inventory. We'll investigate that thoroughly, Morrison said. But right now I'm addressing why a highly qualified student was systematically excluded from participation. Riley demonstrated better threat assessment, better shooting, and better crisis response than anyone else on this range today. Patterson opened his mouth to respond, but Morrison cut him off. Go to central staging and begin the ammunition inventory with the range master. I want every round accounted for and every magazine verified. Move. Patterson hesitated, then walked toward the staging area. The medical teams had completed their initial work and were transporting Martinez and Torres to waiting ambulances for hospital transfer. Other students began emerging from the training area in small groups, their expressions showing confusion about the abrupt end to the exercise. Morrison turned back to Riley and Marcus. I owe you both an apology. This facility failed in multiple ways today. The ammunition failure is inexcusable. The discrimination Riley faced from my lead instructor is equally unacceptable. Riley adjusted her rifle sling. Will the facility continue operating? Morrison looked at the destroyed rifle on the ground, then at the departing ambulances. That depends on what the investigation reveals and whether we can guarantee this never happens again. But regardless of the facility's future, you have my commitment that the exclusion you experienced will be addressed formally. Marcus placed a hand on Riley's shoulder. Let's get your equipment packed. We'll wait for the facility to complete its investigation before deciding next steps. They walked toward the staging area where other students were gathering their gear in subdued silence. Derek caught up to them before they reached the equipment building. He stopped Riley with a careful hand gesture, not quite touching her. I need to say something. Riley turned to face him. I told you to stay down when you were the only one who could actually help, Derek said. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Riley nodded, once in acknowledgement. You were following the instructions Patterson gave you about me. That doesn't make it right, Derek said. Martinez would have bled a lot longer if you had listened to me. Torres might have taken more hits. You made decisions I couldn't make and shots I can't make. That matters more than who was supposed to be team leader. Marcus observed the apology without interrupting. Other students were watching from various distances, their conversations stopping as they noticed the exchange. Derek extended his hand to Riley in a formal gesture of respect. If this facility survives what happened today, I'd be honored to train alongside you properly. Riley shook his hand. Thank you. Derek walked back toward his equipment while other students began approaching with similar expressions of recognition. Morrison watched from near the facility entrance as the dynamic he had observed over 2 days transformed in the wake of crisis and demonstrated capability. 6 hours after the shooting stopped, Morrison sat in his office with the facility's ammunition inventory spread across his desk. Patterson stood near the window with the range master, both men looking at documentation that should have prevented the catastrophic failure. Marcus and Riley waited in chairs along the wall, their presence requested by Morrison for reasons he hadn't yet explained. Morrison held up a manifest form. This shows marking rounds requested for the exercise. 12 magazines, 40 rounds each, all marking ammunition. The range master signed off on a request Friday afternoon. The range master, a retired Army sergeant named Thomas Blake, nodded confirmation. I pulled the marking rounds from our designated storage locker and loaded the magazines myself. Every round should have been non-lethal. But they weren't, Morrison said flatly. 3 students were shot with live ammunition. How does that happen when you personally loaded the magazines? Blake's discomfort showed in his posture. I can't explain it, sir. The marking rounds and live rounds are stored in separate locked cabinets with different access protocols. Morrison turned to Patterson. You checked the ammunition before the exercise began. Patterson shifted his weight. I verified that Blake had loaded magazines according to the manifest. I didn't physically inspect each round. Standard protocol requires instructor verification, Morrison said. That means personal inspection of ammunition, not just trusting paperwork. Patterson's jaw tightened. In 3 years of running exercises at this facility, we've never had an ammunition mix-up. I trusted the established system. The system failed today, Morrison said. 3 people were shot because someone either incompetent or malicious put live rounds into magazines meant for training. I need to know which one it was. Blake spoke up carefully. I've been thinking about the timeline, sir. I loaded those magazines Friday afternoon, around 1600. They stayed in the secure ready room overnight. Patterson signed them out this morning at 0530 for transport to the training area. Who else had access to the ready room between Friday afternoon and Sunday morning? Morrison asked. Blake consulted his access log. 3 instructors had key access for weekend equipment preparation. Patterson, Mike Reynolds, and Sarah Chun. Morrison made notes while speaking. I want statements from all 3 about their movements and whether they entered the ready room during that window. I also want every round remaining in our inventory tested to verify there are no additional mix-ups. Patterson crossed his arms. You're treating this like a criminal investigation. 3 people were shot with ammunition that shouldn't have been in training magazines, Morrison said. Until I know how that happened, I'm treating it as serious as it deserves. Riley had been listening quietly, but now spoke. The opposing force members didn't know they were using live ammunition. Their firing patterns showed no awareness of the lethality. Morrison looked at her. You observed that during the exercise? Yes, sir. They were firing at the same rate and with the same exposure they would use with marking rounds. If they had known the ammunition was lethal, their behavior would have changed. They would have taken more cover and been more selective with their shots. Marcus added his perspective. The opposing force members are victims in this too. They were told they had marking rounds and fired in good faith. When Riley disabled their rifles, she prevented them from causing more harm without their knowledge or intent. Morrison wrote additional notes. That's consistent with their statements. Both opposing force members are cooperative and clearly distressed about what happened. Their stories match regarding ammunition issue and handling. Patterson seized on this point. So it wasn't their fault. It wasn't my fault for trusting the system. This comes down to whoever accessed those magazines between loading and deployment. Or it comes down to inadequate verification protocols, Morrison said. Multiple points of failure contributed to this incident. Ammunition storage, loading procedures, instructor verification, and communication protocols all need examination. A knock on the door interrupted the discussion. Morrison called for entry, and a woman in her 40s wearing business attire stepped inside. She carried a leather portfolio, and her expression conveyed official purpose. Morrison stood. Agent Vega, thank you for coming on short notice. Sarah Vega shook Morrison's hand before surveying the others in the room. She was with the State Tactical Training Oversight Board, a regulatory body that certified facilities like Desert Tactical for advanced weapons instruction. Her presence meant the incident had escalated beyond internal investigation. Agent Vega, Morrison said, this is Jake Patterson, lead instructor. Thomas Blake, range master. Marcus Chun, retired Marine instructor. And Riley Chun, student participant. Vega took the empty chair Morrison offered. I've read the preliminary incident report. 3 wounded by live ammunition during a marking round exercise. Threat neutralized by a 16-year-old student who disabled both opposing force rifles with precision fire. That's an unusual situation requiring thorough examination. Patterson started to speak, but Vega held up a hand. I'll be interviewing each person individually. Mr. Morrison, I'll need access to all facility records, including ammunition logs, training protocols, and student applications. Morrison handed her a folder. I prepared documentation covering the past 6 months of operations. Ammunition logs are included along with access records for our secure storage areas. Vega opened the folder and scanned the top documents. Her eyes paused on Riley's application. National medals in precision shooting. 12 competitions completed. Yet she was assigned to observation status on day 1 of the course. Patterson began his explanation. Age and experience factors suggested a graduated approach to participation would be safer for all involved. Vega looked at him directly. Did you review her qualification scores before making that decision? Patterson hesitated. I reviewed her age and determined that regardless of scores, tactical training environments require maturity that comes with years of real-world experience. So you didn't review her scores, Vega said. You made a determination based on age alone. Safety protocols require judgment calls, Patterson said. I exercised that judgment in good faith. Vega made notes without responding. Morrison, I'll need statements from all wounded students. Are they available for interview? Martinez and Torres are at Desert Regional Medical Center, Morrison said. Derek Chun was treated and released. He's waiting in the facility common area if you want to speak with him first. I'll start with Riley Chun, Vega said. Everyone else can wait outside while I conduct individual interviews. Patterson opened his mouth to object, but Morrison gestured toward the door. The range master filed out first, followed by Marcus, who placed a brief hand on Riley's shoulder before leaving. Patterson lingered at the threshold until Morrison's expression made it clear the instruction included him. The door closed and Vega studied Riley for several seconds before speaking. Tell me about your training background. Riley provided a concise summary of her 8 years working with Marcus, the competition she had entered, and the skills she had developed. Vega took notes while listening without interruption. When Riley finished, Vega asked her next question. Describe what happened from your perspective during the exercise. Riley walked through the timeline from deployment to the moment firing stopped. She explained identifying the opposing force positions, calculating distances, recognizing live ammunition from sound signature, and making the decision to disable rather than neutralize. Vega stopped writing. You chose to shoot their rifles instead of shooting the people themselves. Yes, ma'am. They weren't aware they had live ammunition. Shooting them would have caused unnecessary casualties when the actual problem was their weapons. That's a sophisticated tactical decision, Vegas said. Most people under stress would have taken a shot that neutralized the immediate threat to themselves. My father taught me that precision means choosing the right target, Riley said. The opposing force members weren't the threat. Their rifles loaded with wrong ammunition created the threat. Disable the rifles and the problem. Vega reviewed her notes. You made 2 shots at approximately 500 yards each. Under combat stress, 8 seconds apart, and both shots hit firing chambers during the moment the opposing force pulled their triggers. Riley nodded. Timing was critical. If I hit the chambers when they weren't firing, the rounds would have just damaged inactive metal. By penetrating during firing, their bullets were contained inside the destroyed chambers. Where did you learn that technique? Vega asked. My father taught theoretical applications of precision timing. I adapted the theory to the immediate problem. Vega set down her pen. In 20 years of investigating tactical training incidents, I've never encountered a student with your level of capability or judgment under pressure. Yet your instructor spent 2 days excluding you from participation. Riley's expression didn't change. He made decisions based on the information he prioritized. Which was your age, Vega said. Not your qualifications, not your scores, not your documented training history. Just your age. Yes, ma'am. Vega reopened her portfolio and extracted Riley's application. These scores would qualify you for advanced courses at any facility in the state. The recommendation letter from a Marine marksmanship coach specifically notes your exceptional fundamentals and tactical awareness. Patterson never reviewed any of this before excluding you. Riley remained quiet, offering no criticism of Patterson. Vega studied her carefully. You understand that your actions today likely saved lives and definitely prevented additional casualties. I understand that the situation required immediate response, Riley said. Most 16-year-olds would be traumatized by what you experienced, Vega said. You're sitting here describing tactical decisions like you're filing an operations report. My father prepared me for stress responses, Riley said. He taught me that capability under pressure comes from training that anticipates chaos. Today wasn't the first time I've had to perform under difficult conditions. It was just the first time the stakes were real instead of simulated. Vega closed her portfolio. I'll need to interview the others, but based on what you've told me and what I've read in these documents, my preliminary assessment is that this facility's protocols failed at multiple levels, while its most capable student was systematically prevented from participating until crisis forced her involvement. 48 hours after the incident, Morrison assembled everyone involved in the conference room for Vega's findings. Patterson sat at one end of the table with Blake beside him. both men tense with anticipation. Marcus and Riley occupied chairs near the window. Derek had returned at Morrison's request along with two other students who had witnessed the aftermath. Vega entered carrying a thick folder and a laptop. She sat up at the head of the table without preamble. My investigation is complete. The State Oversight Board has reviewed my findings and authorized me to present conclusions and recommendations. Patterson straightened in his chair. I want to state for the record that I followed established facility protocols throughout this incident. Vega opened her folder without looking at him. The ammunition failure originated with improper storage segregation. Live rounds and marking rounds were stored in adjacent cabinets with similar key access. Blake loaded magazines Friday afternoon using what he believed were marking rounds from the correct cabinet. However, sometime between Thursday and Friday, someone had moved live ammunition boxes into the marking round cabinet. Blake leaned forward. I checked the labels on the boxes. They said marking rounds. The labels were incorrect, Vegas said. Someone either mislabeled live ammunition or deliberately placed live rounds in mislabeled boxes. That's still under investigation by local law enforcement as potential criminal negligence or intentional endangerment. Morrison's expression darkened. Do we know who had access to both cabinets during that time frame? Vega consulted her notes. Access logs show 3 instructors entered the ammunition storage area that week. Patterson, Reynolds, and Sarah Chun. All 3 had legitimate reasons for accessing storage. However, none of them reported any concerns about ammunition organization or labeling. Patterson spoke up. We trust our range master to maintain proper inventory. That's his responsibility. It's also instructor responsibility to verify ammunition before exercises, Vegas said. Her tone carried no accusation, but the factual weight landed heavily. You signed out 12 magazines Sunday morning. Standard protocol documented in your own facility handbook requires instructors to physically inspect ammunition before deployment in training scenarios. I verified the magazines were loaded and ready, Patterson said. You verified they existed, Vega corrected. You didn't verify their contents. If you had inspected even one magazine, you would have seen the ammunition was wrong. Live rounds look different from marking rounds. The difference is obvious to anyone with basic weapons knowledge. Patterson's face flushed. In 3 years of running exercises, I've never had to question Blake's competence. The system worked reliably until now. Systems fail, Vegas said. That's why we have verification protocols. Your failure to follow documented procedures meant live ammunition reached the training area without detection. Morrison interrupted before Patterson could respond. What are your recommendations regarding facility operations? Vega turned to a new page in her folder. Immediate suspension of Patterson's instructor certification pending completion of remedial training on safety protocols. Blake receives formal reprimand, but maintains his position with mandatory retraining on ammunition handling. Facility operations can resume after implementing enhanced verification procedures and complete ammunition inventory audit. Patterson stood abruptly. You're suspending my certification over a system failure I didn't cause. You failed to follow safety protocols, Vega said without raising her voice. 3 students were shot because you didn't verify ammunition. That's grounds for suspension under state regulations regardless of who mislabeled the boxes. This is excessive, Patterson said. My record shows 3 years of safe operations. Your record also shows systematic exclusion of qualified students based on demographics rather than capability, Vega said. She pulled another document from her folder. I interviewed 4 previous applicants who were discouraged from participating in advanced courses despite meeting all qualification requirements. All 4 were under 18. All 4 had competitive shooting backgrounds. All 4 were told they should wait until they were older. Patterson remained standing. Youth participation creates liability concerns. I made judgment calls to protect the facility. You made discriminatory decisions that violated facility policy, Vegas said. Morrison's documented policy allows youth participation with proper qualifications and waivers. You overrode that policy based on personal bias. Morrison spoke directly to Patterson. I authorized youth participation after legal review, confirmed our insurance covered qualified minors. You knew that policy existed and chose to ignore it. Patterson looked at the others in the room as if seeking support. His expression found none. I acted in what I believed were the best interests of safety and training quality. Your beliefs contradicted documented policy and demonstrable facts, Vega said. Riley Chen's qualifications exceeded most adult students in your course. Her performance under crisis exceeded yours. Yet you spent 2 days excluding her from participation and gave explicit instructions for her partner to prevent her involvement. Derek spoke up. Jake told me to keep her behind me and handle everything myself. Told me if she couldn't keep up to finish solo. I followed those instructions until people started getting shot. Vega made a note. Your compliance with improper instructions isn't at issue, Mr. Chun. Your subsequent recognition of Riley's capability and public apology demonstrate appropriate response to new information. Patterson sat down heavily. So you're suspending my certification and ending my position here. Morrison answered before Vega could respond. Your contract is terminated effective immediately. The suspension of your state certification is separate from facility employment. You're dismissed from desert tactical training. Patterson's shock registered visibly. David, I've run this program for 3 years. We've trained hundreds of students successfully. We've also excluded qualified applicants based on age discrimination and failed safety protocols that resulted in casualties, Morrison said. Those failures end your employment here. Patterson looked at Marcus, then at Riley. This is because I didn't recognize what she could do. This is because you refused to look at her qualifications before making exclusion decisions, Morrison said. Because you failed to verify ammunition before deploying it in a training exercise. Because you prioritize your assumptions over documented policy and safety requirements. Vega closed her folder. Mr. Patterson, you have the right to appeal the certification suspension through the state board. That process is explained in the documents I'm providing you. Your employment termination is between you and Mr. Morrison. Patterson collected the papers Vega handed him. He stood without looking at anyone and walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned back to Riley. You made incredible shots. I should have given you the chance to demonstrate that earlier. Riley met his eyes without malice. Thank you. Patterson left, and the door closed behind him with a soft click. The conference room settled into brief silence before Morrison continued the meeting. Agent Vega, what's your assessment of Riley's actions during the incident? Vega opened her laptop and displayed a technical analysis on screen. Both destroyed rifles were sent to forensic examination. The precision required to penetrate firing chambers during trigger pull at 500-yard distances under stress conditions exceeds capability standards for most professional snipers. The tactical decision to disable weapons rather than shoot the opposing force members demonstrates advanced judgment rarely seen in experienced operators, much less civilian students. Marcus spoke for the first time since the meeting began. Riley applied fundamentals I taught her and adapted them to circumstances I never anticipated. That's what proper training should enable. Vega turned to Riley. Your instructor evaluations from previous competitions consistently note exceptional composure and technical precision. Your performance Sunday validated those assessments under the most demanding conditions possible. Riley accepted the observation without comment. Vega continued, addressing Morrison. My report recommends Desert Tactical establish formal youth advanced training programs, with Riley Chun serving as junior instructor once she completes state certification requirements. Morrison looked at Riley. Would you be interested in a teaching position? Riley considered the question carefully. I prefer to complete certification and teach fundamentals to other youth shooters. Not as compensation for what happened, but as a way to open access for qualified people who face the same barriers I encountered. Morrison nodded. I can create a junior instructor apprentice position if you're willing to pursue state certification. The program would focus on youth students ages 14 to 17 with competitive shooting backgrounds. My goal is still military service, Riley said. Teaching would be part-time until I enlist. That works for our needs, Morrison said. We'll start with weekend youth courses. Blake can supervise your initial instruction sessions until your certification is complete. Vega made final notes. I'll include this arrangement in my formal recommendations to the State Board. Desert Tactical will serve as a model facility for inclusive training standards. Derek spoke again from his position at the table. I'd like to formally request Riley as instructor for my police department's marksmanship refresher course. We run quarterly training and could use someone who teaches fundamentals as precisely as she demonstrated them. Morrison looked at Derek with interest. Your department would contract with a 16-year-old instructor. Derek smiled slightly. My department would contract with the person who made shots under pressure that our tactical team couldn't replicate on a perfect day at a controlled range. Age becomes irrelevant when capability is that clearly demonstrated. Vega gathered her materials. That's an excellent example of how proper recognition of ability should override demographic assumptions. I'll be submitting my final report to the State Board within 72 hours. Mr. Morrison, you'll receive copies of all documentation, including recommended protocol changes. Morrison stood and shook Vega's hand. Thank you for thorough investigation. We'll implement every recommendation immediately. Vega turned to Riley before leaving. You handled an impossible situation with precision and judgment that saved lives. The tactical training community needs more people with your capability and character. After Vega departed, the remaining group sat in extended silence. Blake was the first to speak. I owe you an apology too, Riley. I should have caught the ammunition error before it reached the training area. Riley's response was measured. Multiple points failed in the system. Recognition and correction matter more than individual blame. Marcus placed a hand on Riley's shoulder. Your grandfather would have been proud of how you handled yourself. He taught me that capability under pressure defines character. Morrison addressed the group. We restart operations next week with new protocols in place. Riley, I'll have certification requirements and teaching schedules prepared for your review. Derek, send me your department's training needs, and we'll develop a contract. Blake, you're working with our insurance provider to document the new verification procedures. 1 week after Patterson's termination, students returned to Desert Tactical for completion of their advanced course under new lead instructor Maria Santos, a former Army Ranger with 15 years of tactical training experience. Riley arrived early with Marcus to prepare for her first day as junior instructor apprentice. Morrison had restructured the weekend to include youth fundamental sessions running parallel to the adult advanced course. Derek pulled into the parking lot moments after Riley, followed by Martinez hobbling on crutches with his leg wound still healing. Torres arrived separately, his shoulder movement limited but improving. The three men approached Riley at the facility entrance where she was organizing equipment cases. Derek extended his hand formally. I wanted to apologize properly before the course starts. I told you to stay down when you were the only one capable of helping. That was wrong. Riley shook his hand. You were following the instructions Patterson gave you. The situation changed, and you adapted. Martinez leaned on his crutches. I've been shooting for 12 years, competed in regional law enforcement competitions, trained with some of the best instructors in the Southwest. That shot you made at my position was beyond anything I could do on my best day. Riley helped Martinez adjust his crutch position for better balance. The distance and conditions were challenging, but the fundamentals remained the same. Wind reading, elevation calculation, breathing control. My father taught me to treat every shot the same regardless of external pressure. Torres rotated his wounded shoulder carefully. The hospital doctors wanted to know details about who shot me. When I explained it was live ammunition in a training accident and a 16-year-old disabled both shooters to stop it, they thought I was confused from blood loss. The stories sound impossible until you see the destroyed rifles, Derek said. I visited the evidence room with Agent Vega. Both chambers penetrated with surgical precision. The forensic examiner said the timing required was something he'd only seen in theoretical training scenarios. Marcus emerged from the facility carrying additional equipment. He He nodded to the three men before setting cases beside Riley's organized staging area. The new instructor is ready for you inside. She's professional and knows her material. We're here to work with Riley first, Martinez said. Morrison told us she's starting youth fundamentals instruction today, and we requested permission to observe. Riley looked at Marcus with mild surprise. I thought my first session was with youth students only. Morrison appeared in the doorway. I approved their request. They want to see your teaching methods, and Derek's department is serious about the contract discussion. Observing your instruction style helps him make informed decisions. Derek added context. My captain needs justification for hiring someone your age. I told him your capability under pressure speaks for itself, but he wants documentation of your teaching methods and communication skills. Watching you instruct provides that documentation. Riley accepted this explanation. My first students arrive in 20 minutes. You're welcome to observe from the tower platform or the side benches. We'll use the benches, Torres said. Want to hear how you break down fundamentals? Santos called from inside the facility for the adult students to assemble for briefing. Derek, Martinez, and Torres headed inside, while Riley continued her equipment preparation. Marcus helped her arrange shooting mats and target stands designed for youth eyes participants. Your first real teaching session, Marcus said. Nervous? Riley checked ammunition boxes and verified each contained marking rounds with proper labeling. The fundamentals don't change based on age. If I teach the same way you taught me, the students will learn properly. For vehicles pulled into the parking lot carrying Riley's first youth students, 3 girls and 2 boys between ages 14 and 16 emerged with their parents, all carrying rifle cases and equipment bags. Riley greeted each family at the entrance, confirming their registration and reviewing safety requirements. Morrison joined the group for introductions. This is Riley Chun, your instructor for today's fundamentals course. Riley competed nationally for 7 years and recently completed advanced tactical training here at our facility. She'll be teaching the same precision shooting principles used in military and law enforcement applications. One parent, a woman in her 40s, spoke with concern in her voice. I read about the incident last week. Is the facility safe for our children? Morrison's response was direct and professional. The incident resulted from an ammunition storage failure that has been completely corrected. We've implemented enhanced verification protocols, and all ammunition is now triple-checked before any training exercise. Agent Vega from the State Oversight Board inspected our new procedures and certified them as exceeding standard requirements. Another parent asked Riley directly, "How old are you?" 16, Riley said. "I've been training since I was 8 under my father's instruction. He's a retired Marine sniper instructor, and he'll be supervising today's session along with our range master." The parents exchanged glances before the first woman spoke again. "We read that you made shots during the incident that saved lives. Is that accurate?" Riley kept her tone factual. "The situation required immediate response, and I applied fundamentals my father taught me. Today we'll be teaching those same fundamentals in a controlled environment with proper safety protocols." The parents seemed satisfied. They said goodbye to their children and departed, leaving Riley with 5 attentive students who looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Riley led them to the outdoor range where Derek, Martinez, and Torres sat on observation benches 30 feet behind the firing line. Marcus positioned himself near the equipment area where he could observe without interfering. Blake monitored from the tower platform with radio communication to all instructors. Riley began her instruction with breathing control. She demonstrated the natural respiratory pause, explaining how proper breathing stabilizes the body and creates consistency between shots. The 5 students practiced the technique without weapons first, Riley moving between them to provide individual corrections. "Your shoulders are tense," Riley told one girl. "Tension travels through your body and affects your stability. Relax your upper body and let your breathing do the work." The girl adjusted, and Riley nodded approval. "Better. Now hold that respiratory pause for 2 seconds. That's your shooting window." After 20 minutes of breathing work, Riley moved to trigger control. She used training rifles with snap caps to demonstrate proper finger placement and trigger press. Each student practiced the motion repeatedly while Riley watched for common errors. "You're anticipating the shot," Riley told one boy whose trigger finger jerked slightly. "The trigger press should surprise you. Smooth, steady pressure until the break happens naturally." From the observation bench, Torres whispered to Derek, "She's teaching exactly what our academy instructors taught us, but she explains it clearer. No complicated terminology, just direct correction." Martinez added his observation. "Watch how she moves between students. She spends different amounts of time based on individual need. That girl on the left is getting more attention because she's struggling with consistency. The boy on the right needed one correction and she moved on. That's advanced instruction awareness." Riley progressed the students to live fire after verifying each had mastered the fundamentals. She personally checked every magazine before distribution, demonstrating the verification protocol Morrison had implemented. Each student fired 5-round groups at targets 50 yards downrange. The first girl completed her group with shots scattered across a 10-inch area. Riley examined the target carefully before providing feedback. "Your breathing is correct, but you're pulling the rifle into your shoulder differently for each shot. The fundamentals work together. Consistent breathing requires consistent body position." The girl adjusted her stance based on Riley's guidance and fired another 5-round group. This time, the shots grouped within 4 inches. Riley offered quiet approval. "That's improvement. The group size will tighten as your muscle memory develops. For now, focus on repeating exactly what you just did." Marcus watched from his position with visible pride. Morrison joined him briefly. "She teaches the way you do, but with her own refinements. The students respond well to her. She understands what it's like to learn these skills at their age," Marcus said. "That connection makes the instruction more effective than what an adult instructor could provide." After 90 minutes, Riley concluded the session with each student firing a final 10-round group. 4 of the 5 showed measurable improvement from their first attempts. Riley reviewed each target individually with the students, pointing out what worked and what needed continued practice. The parents returned for pickup as Riley was organizing equipment. One father approached with his daughter beside him. "She won't stop talking about your instruction. Says she learned more today than in 2 months at her previous shooting club." Riley handed the man a target showing his daughter's progression. "The fundamentals take time to develop. Consistent practice matters more than quick results." "Will you be teaching next weekend?" the father asked. "We'd like to register for continuing instruction." Morrison stepped in to answer. "Riley will teach youth fundamentals every Saturday, starting next month. Registration opens on our website tomorrow." After the families departed, Derek approached Riley with Martinez and Torres following. "Captain approved the contract. Our department wants you to teach a 2-day fundamentals refresher for 30 officers next month." Riley looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragement. "I'll need to coordinate with school's schedule, but I can make that work." Torres added his request. "My daughter is 14 and interested in competitive shooting. Would you accept private students for individual instruction?" Riley considered this. "I'm focusing on group courses right now, but I can recommend other qualified instructors if you want individual training." "We want you," Torres said. "She saw the news coverage and told me she wants to learn from someone who teaches fundamentals properly and happens to be close to her age." Martinez spoke up. "I'm returning to full duty in 6 weeks. When I'm cleared for firearms qualification, I want to schedule private instruction with you. Not because you saved my life, though that matters, but because you demonstrate fundamentals better than any instructor I've worked with." Derek smiled at Riley's slightly overwhelmed expression. "Welcome to what happens when capability becomes undeniable. People stop caring about demographics and start focusing on results." Morrison gathered everyone's attention. Agent Vega's final report was published this morning. She recommended Desert Tactical as a model facility for inclusive training standards and specifically cited Riley's instruction methods as exemplary for youth education programs. Santos emerged from the facility with her adult students who had completed their afternoon session. She walked over to where Riley stood, surrounded by the observers. I hear your morning session went well. The students improved measurably, Riley said. Santos extended her hand. I'm Maria Santos, the new lead instructor. Morrison tells me you're pursuing state certification. When you complete that process, I'd value having you on staff permanently. Riley shook her hand. Thank you. I'm planning military service after high school, but I can teach part-time until then. Military will be lucky to have you, Santos said. Just remember you've got a position here whenever you want it. 3 weeks after the incident, Martinez returned to the facility on his own time with a request that surprised Morrison. He wanted to test his theory about what had actually happened during those critical 8 seconds when Riley neutralized both opposing force positions. Morrison agreed on the condition that Marcus and Agent Vega observe the reconstruction. They assembled at the outdoor range on a Saturday morning with the 2 destroyed rifles positioned at distances matching the original opposing force locations. Martinez had brought measurement equipment and ballistic software typically used in forensic investigations. Vega arrived with her official documentation and recording equipment for potential inclusion in training materials. Martinez set up his laptop near the observation tower. I've been analyzing the forensic reports on both rifles. The chamber penetrations occurred at the exact microsecond each opposing force member pulled their trigger. That timing window is less than 1/10 of a second. Marcus stood beside Riley, who wore her range equipment and carried the same rifle she had used during the incident. You want her to explain the technique. I want to understand if it was technique or extraordinary luck, Martinez said. Because if it's technique, it means she calculated timing based on observed patterns. If it's luck, then we're discussing a once-in-a-lifetime coincidence that happened twice in 8 seconds. Riley set up at the firing position she had occupied during the original incident. The destroyed rifles were mounted on stands at the eastern and western ridge locations, empty and inert, but positioned for measurement purposes. Vega activated her recording equipment. Riley, walk us through your decision process, starting from the moment you identified both shooter positions. Riley looked downrange at the eastern position. First shooter established a rhythm. 3 rounds for second pause, 3 rounds. His pattern was consistent for the 30 seconds I observed before taking my shot. That pattern told me when he would fire next. Martinez typed notes. You identified a firing rhythm from sound alone while under stress. Sound signature combined with impact pattern on terrain around Derek's position, Riley said. The consistency indicated training rather than panic firing. Trained shooters develop rhythm. What about the second shooter? Vega asked. Western position had different rhythm, Riley said. 2 rounds, 6-second pause, 2 rounds. Slower rate, but equally consistent. I had both patterns tracked before I made my decision to engage. Marcus added context. I taught her pattern recognition for multiple threat assessment. Military snipers face scenarios where multiple hostiles operate in zones with predictable behaviors. Reading those patterns creates engagement windows. Martinez looked up from his laptop. So you weren't just making difficult shots? You were timing your trigger pull to coincide with their trigger pulls based on patterns you extrapolated from 30 seconds of observation. Riley nodded. The chamber penetration needed to occur during their firing sequence. Hit the chamber while inactive, and you just damage metal. Hit it during firing, and their round is contained by the penetration, destroying the weapon and ending their ability to shoot. Vega made notes. That's graduate-level tactical thinking applied in real-time under life-threatening conditions. My father taught me that precision means choosing not just where to shoot, but when to shoot, Riley said. The timing mattered more than the distance. Martinez stood and walked to the eastern position marker. The forensic report shows your round entered this chamber at an angle that required you to anticipate his exact head position and rifle orientation at moment of firing. You couldn't see him clearly through vegetation, but your shot assumed he would be in firing stance with rifle oriented at specific angle. Riley followed him to the position. His previous shots established his shooting position and stance. Trained shooters returned to the same position repeatedly for consistency. I calculated where his chamber would be based on where his shots originated and standard firing positions for that terrain. So you shot it where you knew the chamber would be, not where you could see it was, Vegas said. Correct, Riley confirmed. Visual confirmation wasn't possible through the vegetation. I used pattern recognition and tactical knowledge to determine chamber location. Martinez returned to his laptop and ran calculations. The ballistic data shows your round traveled 520 yards, penetrated light vegetation without deflection, and entered a firing chamber with less than 2-inch margin of error. Then you repeated that process 8 seconds later at a different distance with different vegetation and a different firing pattern. Riley said nothing, letting the facts speak for themselves. Vega addressed Marcus. How many students have you trained who could execute what Riley did? In 22 years of instruction, Marcus said, I've trained hundreds of Marines in precision shooting. Maybe a dozen reached skill levels comparable to Riley's capability. None of them could have made those decisions at 16 years old under her stress conditions. Martinez closed his laptop. This wasn't luck. This was application of fundamentals at a level that most professional snipers never achieve. You calculated patterns, anticipated positions, timed shots to microsecond precision, and made tactical decisions that prioritized minimizing casualties while neutralizing threats. Riley adjusted her rifle sling. My father taught me the fundamentals. The situation required applying them. Morrison had been observing from the equipment area. He walked over to join the group. Agent Vega, does this information change anything in your report? Vega considered the question carefully. It reinforces my conclusions about Riley's capability and Patterson's failure to recognize it. This level of tactical sophistication should have been apparent from her competition records and qualification scores. Patterson's refusal to review her documentation meant he missed indicators of exceptional ability. Martinez spoke directly to Riley. I want to apologize again, but more specifically now. I dismissed you before the exercise started. Made a joke to Torres about babysitting duty. Then you saved my life by making a shot I couldn't make and applying tactical judgment I didn't possess in that moment. Riley met his eyes. You apologized last week. That's sufficient. It's not sufficient, Martinez said, because my dismissal wasn't based on your capability or qualifications. It was based on your age and my assumptions about what someone 16 years old could do. That's the same prejudice Patterson demonstrated. Torres arrived at the range, carrying his rifle case. He had recovered enough to return to shooting and had scheduled time with Riley for technique review. He caught the end of Martinez's comment. We all made those assumptions. I told my captain that hiring a teenage instructor was crazy until I watched her teach. Then I understood that capability doesn't correlate with age the way we assume it does. Morrison gathered everyone's attention. The state board published Vega's report yesterday. 3 other tactical training facilities contacted me asking about implementing youth inclusion programs modeled on our approach. Riley's story is changing how the industry thinks about age-based qualification standards. Riley's discomfort with the attention showed in her posture. I just want to teach fundamentals to students who face the same barriers I encountered. That's exactly why the programs will work, Vegas said. You understand the exclusion from personal experience. That perspective makes you more effective at creating inclusive training environments than instructors who never face those barriers. Marcus placed a hand on Riley's shoulder. Your grandfather used to say that the best teachers are those who remember what it was like to learn. You're still close enough to learning to teach it better than people who've been experts for decades. Derek's police cruiser pulled into the parking lot. He was on duty, but had stopped by with an update about his department's contract. He approached the group carrying a folder. Captain signed off on the contract and increased the student count to 40 officers. He also wants you to develop a youth outreach program for our department's community engagement initiative. Riley took the folder and reviewed the contract details. This is a significant time commitment. I'll need to coordinate with school and my existing teaching schedule. My captain is flexible on timing, Derek said. He's more interested in having you develop curriculum that other instructors can implement long-term. Your methods, your approach, but scalable across multiple departments. That's a better use of my time than teaching the same fundamentals repeatedly, Riley said. I can create standardized curriculum that maintains quality while reaching more students. Morrison looked at Marcus. She thinks like a program developer, not just an instructor. Her mother was an education administrator before she passed, Marcus said. Riley absorbed organizational thinking from watching her mother design school curricula. She applies those skills to tactical training naturally. Vega packed her recording equipment. I'm submitting supplemental materials to the state board recommending Riley's teaching methods be studied for potential incorporation into state certification standards. Her approach to youth instruction demonstrates effectiveness that could benefit all instructors working with younger students. Martinez helped Vega carry equipment to her vehicle. Before they left, he turned back to Riley. I'm cleared for duty next week. I'm scheduling private instruction with you before I return to tactical operations. I want to learn what you do differently that makes your fundamentals more effective. Riley accepted the request with a slight nod. We'll focus on pattern recognition and timing calculation. Those skills translate to any shooting scenario. After Martinez and Vega departed, Torres set up at the firing line for his scheduled session with Riley. Marcus moved to the observation area to give them space while Morrison returned to facility management tasks. Derek lingered near Riley's equipment area. I need to ask you something, Derek said. My daughter is 12. She's interested in shooting sports, but I've been hesitant because she's so young. After watching you teach and seeing what you're capable of, I'm rethinking my assumptions. Should I start her now or wait until she's older? Riley considered the question while helping Torres adjust his shooting position downrange. I started at 8. My father taught me that fundamentals learned young become permanent. The earlier you start with proper instruction, the better the foundation. Age isn't the limiting factor. Quality instruction is. Torres called out from the firing line. Ready for observation. Riley walked to stand beside him. Show me your breathing pattern. Derek watched Riley work with Torres for several minutes, noting how she identified inefficiencies in his technique that other instructors had missed. He made a decision and pulled out his phone to text his wife about enrolling their daughter in Riley's next youth fundamentals course. Marcus observed from the tower platform with satisfaction. His daughter had transformed barrier into opportunity, exclusion into inclusion, and demonstrated that capability recognized becomes capability multiplied. The facility that had tried to exclude her now built its reputation on the programs she developed and the standards she established. 6 months after the incident, Riley balanced high school coursework with weekend teaching responsibilities that had expanded beyond her initial expectations. Morrison's facility now hosted 30 youth students every Saturday, split into 3 skill level groups. Riley taught fundamentals to beginners while 2 other instructors she had trained handled intermediate and advanced students using her curriculum. Marcus reduced his private instruction schedule to focus on developing youth training materials with Riley. They sat in Morrison's conference room on a Wednesday evening reviewing applications for the spring session when Morrison entered with unexpected news. I received a letter from Military Training Command, Morrison said, placing an official document on the table. They're requesting Riley as guest instructor at the Junior ROTC Marksmanship Summit in 8 months when she turns 18. Riley read the letter carefully. The summit brought together high school ROTC programs from across the Southwest for a week of intensive training. Guest instructors were typically active duty personnel or retired military with distinguished service records. They want me to teach fundamentals to ROTC cadets, Riley said, processing the implications. That's a significant platform. Marcus read over her shoulder. The letter specifically mentions your tactical judgment during the Desert Tactical Incident and your teaching methodology as documented in Vegas State Board report. They're interested in both your capability and your approach to youth instruction. Morrison sat across from them. This is recognition at a level most instructors never receive. Military Training Command doesn't extend invitations casually. Your reputation has reached people who shape how the armed forces think about training. Riley set the letter down. I'm honored, but I need to understand the time commitment. School requirements come first. The summit runs during spring break, Morrison said. I already verified the dates align with your school calendar. You'd miss one weekend of teaching here, but we can adjust the schedule. Marcus looked at his daughter with visible pride. Your grandfather would have loved to see this. He spent 30 years in the Marines and never received an invitation to teach at a training command event. Riley's practical nature surfaced immediately. What would they want me to teach specifically? Morrison slid another document across the table. Proposed curriculum outline. They want you to develop a 3-day fundamentals program focused on precision shooting and tactical decision-making under pressure. The curriculum would be taught to approximately 200 ROTC cadets. 200 students in 3 days, Riley said, calculating the logistics. That requires breaking into smaller groups with multiple instruction stations and coordinated rotation schedules. Marcus smiled. You're already thinking like a program administrator. It's the only way to maintain quality with those numbers, Riley said. If I'm teaching fundamentals, every student needs individual attention for corrections. Mass lecture format doesn't work for skill development. Morrison had anticipated her concern. Military Training Command suggested you bring assistant instructors. They'll cover travel and lodging for up to 3 additional instructors you select. Riley considered the opportunity carefully. I'd want Derek, Martinez, and Torres if they're available. They understand my methods and can replicate the instruction effectively. All 3 are already on board, Morrison said. I contacted them yesterday after receiving the letter. Derek's captain approved his participation. Martinez and Torres requested vacation days to participate. You contacted them before telling me, Riley said with slight amusement. I needed to know if your preferred assistants were available before presenting the opportunity, Morrison explained. Didn't want to offer something that wasn't logistically feasible. Marcus reviewed the proposed curriculum outline. This is comprehensive. Breathing control, trigger discipline, pattern recognition, tactical decision-making. You're being asked to teach the same principles I taught you, but to future military leaders. Riley's expression showed the weight of that responsibility. If I'm teaching students who will serve in actual combat zones, the instruction needs to be perfect. Fundamentals taught incorrectly become permanent flaws that can cost lives. That's why they want you, Morrison said. Your track record demonstrates you understand that principle. Every student you've taught shows measurable improvement because you refuse to accept mediocre execution of fundamentals. A knock on the conference room door interrupted their discussion. Santos entered carrying a folder. Sorry to interrupt, but I have information relevant to Riley's expanding opportunities. Morrison gestured for her to join them. What information? Santos placed the folder on the table. I was contacted by Tactical Training Quarterly, the industry publication that covers advanced weapons instruction. They want to interview Riley for a feature article about youth inclusion in tactical training programs. Riley looked skeptical. I'm not interested in publicity. I teach students, I don't promote myself. Santos anticipated the objection. The article isn't about promoting you personally. It's about documenting the effectiveness of youth inclusion programs and how proper instruction can develop capability regardless of age. Your story provides proof of concept that's changing industry standards. Marcus supported Santos' perspective. Your experience at this facility showed how discrimination prevented optimal outcomes. The article documenting that experience helps other facilities avoid making the same mistakes. Riley remained hesitant. What would the interview involve? Santos opened the folder to show the publication's request. One interview session covering your background, training methodology, and the incident that demonstrated your capability. They also want to photograph you teaching a class and interview some of your students about learning outcomes. The students would need parental permission for interviews and photographs, Riley said immediately. Already addressed in the request, Santos confirmed. The publication requires full consent documentation for any minor participants. Morrison added context. Tactical Training Quarterly reaches every major training facility in the country. An article featuring your methods and the success of our youth program would influence how hundreds of facilities approach age-based qualification standards. Riley looked at Marcus. What do you think? Your mother used to say that expertise without communication limits impact, Marcus said. You've developed effective methods. Sharing those methods multiplies your positive influence beyond the students you can personally teach. Riley considered this perspective. If the article focuses on methodology and program effectiveness rather than personal achievement, I'll participate, but I want editorial review before publication to ensure accuracy. Santos made notes. I'll communicate your requirements to the publication. They're professional and typically grant subject review for technical articles. Morrison's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He read it and looked up with another development. Derek's police captain wants to discuss expanding the department contract. He's proposing a full-year curriculum development project where you create comprehensive training materials for all department firearms instruction. That's a significant expansion from the original 2-day refresher course, Riley said. The captain saw 40% improvement in qualification scores after your fundamentals training, Morrison explained. He wants that improvement systematized across all firearms training his department conducts. Riley pulled out her phone to check her calendar. I need to map existing commitments before accepting additional projects. School, weekend teaching, private instruction sessions, the military summit preparation, and now, potentially, this curriculum development. Marcus recognized the signs of his daughter approaching capacity limits. You're one person. Delegation and time management become critical when opportunities exceed available hours. I can handle curriculum development, Riley said. That's planning work I could do during school breaks and evenings. It's the direct instruction time that creates scheduling conflicts. Morrison had a solution ready. Blake and I discussed this possibility. If you develop standardized curriculum and train additional instructors in your methods, you can scale impact without linear time investment. You become program director rather than primary instructor. Riley processed the shift in role. Program director means less direct teaching. It means your teaching multiplies through instructors you train, Morrison said. One Riley teaching 30 students per weekend reaches 1,500 students per year. One Riley training 10 instructors who each teach 30 students reaches 15,000 students per year. The mathematics made sense, but Riley's preference for direct instruction showed in her hesitation. I became an instructor to teach students who faced barriers like I did. Stepping back from direct teaching feels like abandoning that purpose. Marcus offered perspective. Your purpose was opening access for qualified youth who face discrimination. You can't personally teach every excluded student in the country, but you can train instructors who replicate your methods in facilities nationwide. That accomplishes your purpose at scale. Santos added practical support. You'd still teach, just less frequently and more strategically. Your direct instruction would focus on training other instructors and developing new techniques rather than repeating fundamentals to beginners every weekend. Riley looked at the multiple documents spread across the conference room table. Military summit invitation, publication interview request, expanded police department contract, program director role discussion. 6 months ago, she had been excluded from participation at a single facility. Now her influence shaped industry standards and training programs across multiple institutions. I need time to think about these decisions, Riley said. The military summit is clear acceptance. The publication interview serves program goals. The curriculum development fits my schedule, but the program director role requires more consideration. Take whatever time you need, Morrison said. These opportunities exist because of your capability and character. We're not pressuring you to accept everything immediately. Marcus began gathering documents. Let's head home. You have calculus homework, and I promised your aunt we'd have dinner with her tonight. Riley packed her materials methodically. Before leaving the conference room, she turned back to Morrison and Santos. Thank you for creating opportunities and supporting my development. 6 months ago, this facility tried to exclude me. Now it's building programs around my methods. That transformation means something. Morrison stood and extended his hand. You earned every opportunity through demonstrated excellence. This facility is better because you refuse to accept exclusion and prove capability despite resistance. They departed into the evening, leaving Morrison and Santos in the conference room. Santos organized her folders before speaking. She's handling opportunities most adult instructors never receive and maintaining perspective about her actual purpose. That's remarkable maturity. Morrison agreed. Her father taught her shooting fundamentals. Life taught her that capability recognized creates opportunities that multiply. She's learning to leverage those opportunities for broader impact while staying grounded in her core purpose. Santos headed toward the exit. I'm scheduling the publication interview for 3 weeks out. That gives Riley time to prepare and ensures we have strong student consent documentation. Morrison remained in the conference room after Santos left, reviewing the military training command letter again. 6 months prior, Patterson had dismissed Riley without reading her qualifications. Now Military Training Command specifically requested her expertise for future service members. The contrast illustrated how quickly capability recognized could transform exclusion into leadership opportunity. Riley's journey from dismissed student to sought-after instructor demonstrated that talent denied eventually becomes talent undeniable, and institutions that recognize that transformation benefit while those that maintain exclusion diminish. The Tactical Training quarterly interview took place at Desert Tactical on a Saturday morning when Riley had a full class of youth students scheduled. The journalist, Rebecca Marsh, arrived with a photographer and recording equipment designed to capture both Riley's teaching methods and the learning environment she had created. Marsh set up near the observation tower while Riley conducted her regular fundamentals session with 12 students ages 14 to 17. The photographer documented Riley's instruction techniques, capturing moments where she corrected breathing patterns, adjusted shooting stances, and provided individual feedback that addressed each student's specific challenges. After 90 minutes of observation, Marsh requested a formal interview. They sat in Morrison's conference room, with Marcus present at Riley's request. The photographer took several shots of the setting before stepping back to let the interview proceed. Marsh began with direct questions. 6 months ago, you were excluded from participation at this facility based on your age. Now you're teaching courses, training other instructors, and receiving invitations from Military Training Command. How do you process that transformation? Riley's response was measured and factual. The exclusion wasn't unique to me. 4 other qualified youth applicants were discouraged from participating before I arrived. The transformation happened because a crisis forced demonstration of capability that couldn't be dismissed. Once capability was proven, opportunities followed. Marsh consulted her notes. Agent Vega's report describes your shots during the incident as exceeding capability standards for most professional snipers. Can you explain what made those shots possible? Fundamentals taught correctly and practiced consistently, Riley said. My father trained me using the same curriculum he taught Marine Scout snipers. The distance and stress conditions were significant, but the underlying principles remained unchanged. Breathing control, trigger discipline, pattern recognition, tactical decision-making. Those fundamentals work regardless of external circumstances if they're executed properly. Marcus added context. Riley demonstrated that age doesn't determine capability when training is rigorous and consistent. She received the same instruction I gave Marines with 10 years of service. Her youth didn't prevent her from mastering the material. Marsh turned to her next question. Your teaching methods have been described as uniquely effective, particularly with youth students. What do you do differently than traditional instructors? Riley considered the question carefully. I remember what it was like to learn these skills recently. Many instructors are decades removed from being beginners. That distance makes it harder to identify where students struggle because the instructors have forgotten what confusion feels like. I'm still close enough to learning to recognize the exact points where students need additional support. Marsh made notes while maintaining eye contact. The students I observed today showed significant engagement and progress. Several parents mentioned their children learn more in one session with you than in months at other programs. What creates that accelerated learning? individual attention, and precise correction, Riley said. I don't teach to the group average. Each student gets feedback specific to their actual errors, not generic advice that might apply to someone. That precision in instruction creates precision in execution. The photographer requested permission to document some of Riley's training materials and curriculum documents. Morrison provided access to the standardized instruction guides Riley had developed, which are now used by multiple facilities across the region. Marsh reviewed the materials. These documents show sophisticated understanding of learning progression and skill development. Did you have formal education in instructional design? My mother was an education administrator, Riley said. I watched her develop school curricula and absorbed organizational thinking. When I started teaching shooting fundamentals, I applied those same principles to skills instruction. Marcus explained further. Riley doesn't just teach shooting. She teaches how to learn shooting. That metacognitive approach creates students who can self-correct and continue improving after formal instruction ends. Marsh shifted topics. The incident that demonstrated your capability also revealed serious safety failures at this facility. How do you reconcile teaching at a place that initially excluded you and then experienced a catastrophic ammunition error? Morrison answered before Riley could respond. The facility that excluded Riley and failed safety protocols no longer exists in the same form. We terminated the lead instructor, restructured all safety procedures, implemented enhanced verification requirements, and rebuilt programs around inclusive standards. The transformation was comprehensive. Riley added her perspective. Institutions can change when leadership commits to change. Morrison addressed both the discrimination and the safety failures. The facility I teach at now is substantially different from the one that tried to exclude me. Marsh pressed further. But doesn't the memory of being dismissed and then nearly killed by facility negligence create anger or resentment? Riley's response came without hesitation. Anger serves no purpose. The situation created opportunity to demonstrate capability and change standards. 3 students were wounded, which is serious. But the outcome included improved safety protocols, inclusive programs, and recognition that age-based exclusion prevents optimal training outcomes. That positive impact outweighs personal resentment. Marsh seemed surprised by the lack of bitterness. Most people in your situation would struggle with those feelings. My father taught me that capability demonstrated creates influence, Riley said. Resentment would diminish that influence. I focus on using the platform I've gained to help students who face similar barriers. The photographer requested shots of Riley with some of her students for the article. Several youth from the morning session volunteered with parental permission. They gathered at the outdoor range while the photographer documented the training environment and the relationship between Riley and her students. One student, a 15-year-old girl named Sarah, spoke to Marsh during the photo session. Before Riley's class, I was told by 3 different instructors that I was too young for advanced training. Riley proved that wasn't true and showed me how to develop skills properly. She's why I'm competing regionally now. Marsh interviewed several other students who shared similar experiences of exclusion at other facilities, followed by rapid skill development under Riley's instruction. The pattern was consistent across different ages and backgrounds. Riley's teaching methods worked because she understood both the technical fundamentals and the psychological barriers facing young shooters. After completing student interviews, Marsh returned to the conference room for final questions. Derek had arrived to observe the interview process and provide perspective from law enforcement. Martinez and Torres joined via video call since they couldn't attend in person. Marsh addressed all of them. Riley's teaching has impacted your professional development. Can you describe that impact? Derek spoke first. She taught my department fundamentals we thought we already knew. Turns out we were executing those fundamentals with inefficiencies that limited our accuracy. Riley identified specific technical errors our previous instructors missed. After her training, 40 officers showed measurable improvement in qualification scores. Martinez added his experience through the video connection. I've been shooting professionally for 12 years. I competed at high levels and received training from elite instructors. Riley taught me pattern recognition techniques that change how I assess tactical situations. She sees things other instructors don't see because her mind works differently. Torres contributed his observation. My daughter trains with Riley now. Watching Riley teach her showed me the difference between adequate instruction and exceptional instruction. Riley doesn't just correct errors. She explains why the error occurs and how the correction improves performance. That depth of understanding accelerates learning. Marsh looked at Riley. You've heard experienced professionals describe you as exceptional. How do you maintain humility while receiving that level of recognition? Riley met her eyes directly. The fundamentals I teach came from my father, who learned them from his instructors, who learned from their instructors. I'm part of a teaching lineage, not an originator. My contribution is adapting proven methods for youth students and creating systems that let those methods scale. That's valuable, but it's not exceptional in the way people assume. Marcus smiled at his daughter's response. She's describing exactly what makes her exceptional: the ability to recognize herself as part of a larger system rather than an isolated talent. That perspective keeps her focused on continuous improvement instead of resting on achievement. Marsh closed her notebook. Final question. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Military service, Riley said immediately. That was always my goal. The teaching and program development are meaningful, but they're preparing me for service rather than replacing that objective. Morrison added information. We've structured Riley's role to accommodate her military plans. She's developed curriculum and trained instructors who can continue the programs after she enlists. Her legacy here will be the systems she created, not her personal instruction. Marsh stood and shook hands with everyone present. This article will publish in next month's edition. You'll receive advance copies for review as requested. After Marsh and the photographer departed, Riley returned to the range where afternoon students were beginning to arrive. Marcus watched her transition seamlessly from interview subject to instructor, her focus shifting completely to the students who needed her attention. Morrison joined Marcus at the observation point. That interview will reach thousands of facility operators and instructors. Her influence is expanding beyond what direct teaching could ever accomplish. Marcus agreed. She's becoming what her grandfather was, a person whose impact on training standards exceeds their individual instruction. He changed how the Marines thought about sniper training. She's changing how the industry thinks about youth capability. Derek prepared to depart for his shift. Before leaving, he approached Marcus. Tell Riley that the captain wants to expand our contract again. Her curriculum development for basic firearms instruction worked so well that he wants her to design advanced tactical training materials too. Marcus made note of the request. I'll pass that along, though at some point we need to acknowledge she's approaching capacity limits. Derek smiled. Welcome to what happens when excellence becomes recognized. Everyone wants access to it. Riley's challenge now is managing demand rather than proving capability. Torres and Martinez ended their video call after exchanging final comments about Riley's upcoming military summit preparation. The range filled with afternoon students while Riley began her second teaching session of the day. Her movement between students showed the practiced efficiency of someone who had found their purpose and was executing it with precision that matched her shooting fundamentals. The regional youth shooting competition arrived 8 months after the Desert Tactical incident. Riley attended not as competitor, but as coach for 12 students from her fundamentals program. Morrison had arranged for facility sponsorship, providing equipment and travel funding for students whose families couldn't afford competition expenses. The competition took place at a sprawling outdoor facility 2 hours south of Desert Tactical. 300 youth shooters from across 5 states competed in divisions ranging from beginner to advanced. Riley students entered multiple categories based on their skill development over the preceding months. Marcus accompanied Riley as assistant coach, while Derek, Martinez, and Torres came to observe and support. Morrison arrived with Santos to represent the facility officially. The event drew attention from industry observers who had read the Tactical Training quarterly article published 3 weeks prior. Riley gathered her students for a pre-competition briefing near their assigned staging area. The 12 youth, ages 14 to 17, showed nervous energy typical of competitors facing evaluation. Riley recognized the anxiety from her own competition experience. Fundamentals don't change because judges are watching, Riley told them. You've practiced these techniques hundreds of times. Competition pressure tests your consistency, not your capability. Trust your training. Sarah, the 15-year-old who had struggled with breathing control initially, raised her hand. What if I forget the sequence during my run? Then you pause, reset, and execute properly, Riley said. A controlled pause shows better judgment than rushing through errors. Judges recognize composed recovery better than panicked continuation. The students dispersed to prepare their equipment while Riley reviewed the competition schedule with Marcus. Her students were distributed across morning and afternoon time slots with varying levels of difficulty based on their division placements. Martinez approached with information he had gathered from other coaches. Half the coaches here read the quarterly article. They're watching how your students perform because the article claimed your methods produce accelerated development. Riley showed no concern about the scrutiny. The students will perform at their current skill level. If that validates the methods, good. If they struggle, we identify areas needing additional work. The first competition round began with beginner division shooters engaging targets at 100 yards. 2 of Riley's students competed in this category, both having started training only 3 months prior. Riley observed from the designated coaching area, noting their execution of fundamentals under competition stress. The first student, a 14-year-old boy named Jason, completed his run with solid performance. His breathing remained controlled, and his trigger discipline showed the precision Riley had taught. He scored in the top 20% of his division. The second beginner student, a 16-year-old girl named Emma, struggled with wind reading during her run. Her shots grouped well, but missed center mass due to uncorrected wind drift. She finished middle of her division with clear frustration visible. Riley met Emma after her run concluded. Walk me through your wind assessment. Emma described her observations. Riley identified the error immediately. You read the wind at ground level, but didn't account for wind velocity increase at target height. Remember the formula we practiced for elevation wind differential. Emma's frustration shifted to understanding. I forgot to check the downrange vegetation movement at target level. I only watched the flags near the firing line. That's correctable knowledge, not capability failure, Riley said. You'll remember next time because this mistake created memorable consequence. That's how competition improves training. Intermediate division rounds followed with 4 of Riley's students competing. Their performance ranged from top 15% to top 30%, all showing competent fundamentals execution. Judges noted their consistent breathing patterns and disciplined trigger control in official score sheets. During lunch break, several coaches approached Riley with questions about her teaching methodology. The quarterly article had generated interest but left details about specific techniques unexplained. Riley spent 40 minutes answering questions and demonstrating breathing control methods that produced the consistency her students showed. One coach from a facility in Nevada asked directly, "Your students show uniformity in execution that suggests systematic instruction. Most youth programs produce scattered results because students develop individual habits. How do you create that consistency?" Precision and correction during early training, Riley explained. When students first learn fundamentals, they develop habits within the first 20 hours of practice. If those habits include errors, the errors become permanent. I correct execution immediately before errors become habitual. That early precision creates uniform quality across all students. The coach made notes. Most instructors let beginners struggle through initial awkwardness before providing correction. You're saying that approach allows bad habits to form. Exactly, Riley confirmed. The awkwardness is natural, but the specific errors within that awkwardness need immediate correction. Students can be awkward and technically correct simultaneously. The awkwardness decreases with practice. The technical errors become permanent without correction. Advanced division competition began in the afternoon, with Riley's 6 most developed students competing against youth who had been training for years. The increased difficulty included longer distances, smaller targets, and more complex shooting positions. Sarah's run came third in the advanced division sequence. She had progressed from struggling beginner to competitive advanced shooter in 8 months, a development trajectory that drew attention from observers familiar with typical advancement rates. Riley watched Sarah's execution closely. Her breathing pattern showed perfect control, her trigger discipline remained consistent across all shots, and her wind reading demonstrated sophisticated understanding. She completed her run with precision that placed her in the top 10% of advanced division competitors. Torres recorded Sarah's performance on his phone to show his daughter, who trained with Riley but hadn't entered competition yet. That's the kind of shooting I want my daughter to develop. Calm, controlled, technically flawless. Martinez added his analysis. Sarah's executing fundamentals at a level I see in officers with 5 years of experience. Riley's teaching accelerated her development by eliminating the trial and error phase most shooters experience. The final shooter in Riley's group was a 17-year-old boy named David who had been training for 6 months. His advanced division performance exceeded expectations, placing him in the top 5% with scores that approached elite competitor levels. Judges approached Riley after David's run concluded. They wanted confirmation about his training history because his capability seemed inconsistent with his listed experience duration. Riley provided David's training documentation showing 6 months of instruction with detailed practice logs. The judges examined the records carefully before accepting them as legitimate. One judge expressed his perspective. In 30 years of competition oversight, I've rarely seen 6-month students perform at this level. Your instruction methods are producing results that typically require years of development. Consistent fundamentals taught precisely from the beginning eliminate wasted time, Riley said. Most shooters spend years correcting bad habits they developed early. My students develop correct habits initially, so their entire practice time builds capability rather than fighting ingrained errors. Competition results were posted 2 hours before the award ceremony. Riley students placed in the top 30% of their divisions on average, with 3 placing in the top 10%. For students with training durations ranging from 3 to 8 months, the results validated Riley's teaching methodology quantitatively. Morrison arrived at the awards staging area with news. 5 facility operators approached me asking about instructor training opportunities. They want to send their staff to learn your methods and replicate your programs at their facilities. Riley processed the request. That's beyond individual instruction. That's systematic knowledge transfer at institutional level, which is exactly what the industry needs, Morrison said. Your methods work. Other facilities recognize that effectiveness. Now, they want to implement similar approaches at their locations. Marcus joined the conversation. You're transitioning from practitioner to methodology developer. That's a natural progression when individual excellence becomes systematically replicable. The awards ceremony recognized top performers across all divisions. Sarah received 3rd place in Advanced Division Female category. David earned 2nd place in Advanced Division Male category. 8 of Riley's 12 students received recognition for placing in top 20% of their divisions. During the ceremony, the competition director acknowledged Riley specifically. He described her as an instructor whose methods were changing how the industry approached youth training development. The recognition drew sustained applause from the assembled competitors, coaches, and families. After the ceremony concluded, families gathered for departure preparation. Multiple parents approached Riley with thanks for the training their children had received and the confidence competition experience had built. One father pulled Riley aside privately. My daughter Emma is disappointed with her middle division placement, but I watch her shoot. 6 months ago, she had never touched a rifle. Today, she competed against youth who've trained for years and held her own. That transformation came from your instruction. The placement doesn't matter compared to the development. Riley appreciated the perspective. Emma's wind reading error is fixable. She'll remember the correction and improve. Competition revealed the learning opportunity, which is more valuable than a higher placement would have been. The drive back to Desert Tactical included discussion of competition outcomes and upcoming training adjustments. Riley's students had demonstrated that accelerated capability development was achievable through precise, fundamental instruction. The industry attention following their performance suggested that Riley's influence would continue expanding beyond direct teaching into methodology that shaped training standards across multiple facilities and programs. Marcus drove, while Riley reviewed competition score sheets and judged feedback. She was already planning curriculum adjustments based on patterns she observed in student performance. The competition had served its purpose as assessment tool, revealing both strengths and areas needing additional emphasis. "You've built something significant," Marcus said. "Students who perform this quickly validate years of methodology development." Riley looked up from her notes. "They validated your teaching past through my instruction. I'm the transmission mechanism, not the source." "You're both," Marcus said. "You took what I taught you and refined it for more effective transfer to others. That refinement is your contribution. It's valuable, and it's creating impact beyond what either of us could achieve individually." 1 year after the incident at Desert Tactical, Riley stood at the outdoor range on a Saturday morning teaching her regular fundamentals class while reflecting on the transformation that had reshaped her life and influenced an entire industry. 40 youth students now trained at the facility every weekend, split across 4 skill levels with 3 additional instructors Riley had personally trained implementing her curriculum. The Military Training Command Summit invitation had been fulfilled 3 months prior. Riley spent spring break teaching 200 ROTC cadets with Derek, Martinez, and Torres assisting. The program received exceptional evaluations and resulted in requests from 5 additional military training facilities for curriculum consultation. Morrison approached Riley during a break between instruction sessions. He carried a folder containing the facility's annual report. The data showed measurable impact beyond individual student development. Desert Tactical had become the Southwest's leading youth training facility, with a waiting list extending 6 months for new student enrollment. "Riley, I want you to see these numbers," Morrison said, opening the folder. Youth program enrollment increased 400%. Adult enrollment grew 60%, mostly from parents who wanted to train alongside their children. Facility revenue doubled, allowing us to hire 3 full-time staff positions. Your programs transformed this facility from struggling operation to regional leader. Riley reviewed the statistics while monitoring her students on the firing line. The growth created sustainability beyond her direct involvement. She had built systems that would continue functioning after her military enlistment. Marcus joined them with his own announcement. "I'm officially retiring from private instruction next month. The youth programs you develop provide better training than I could offer individually. My remaining students are transferring to your instructors or waiting for your schedule to open." Riley looked at her father with concern. "You're retiring because of my programs?" "I'm retiring because my work is complete," Marcus said. "I taught you everything I knew. You refined it into something more effective and scalable. Watching you teach has shown me what successful knowledge transfer looks like. My contribution now is supporting your development, not competing with it." Santos arrived with news about the Tactical Training quarterly article's impact. The publication received more reader response to your feature than any article in their 20-year history. 15 facilities have implemented youth inclusion programs modeled on your approach. The State Oversight Board is considering new standards for youth training certification based on your methodology. Riley had expected influence, but the scope exceeded her projections. "I developed these programs for students facing barriers I experienced. The systematic adoption is significant, but secondary to helping individual students. That perspective is why the adoption works," Santos said. "You prioritized effectiveness over recognition. The industry respects that authenticity and trusts your methods because they're grounded in genuine commitment to student development." Derek's police cruiser pulled into the parking lot. He had scheduled a meeting with Morrison about expanding the department contract into a multi-year curriculum development partnership. Torres followed in his personal vehicle with his daughter Maya, who had become one of Riley's most dedicated students. They gathered in Morrison's conference room after Riley's morning session concluded. Derek presented the department's proposal for comprehensive training materials covering everything from basic firearms instruction to advanced tactical scenarios. The contract value exceeded what most facilities generated from a full year of courses. "My captain wants Riley as primary curriculum developer with 3-year commitment," Derek explained. "We're prepared to work around her school schedule and military plans. The deliverables focus on documentation and instructor training rather than direct teaching." Riley examined the contract details carefully. "This is significant financial commitment for work I'll be doing while preparing for military service. What happens if my enlistment timeline conflicts with deliverables? We've built flexibility into the schedule specifically for that concern," Derek said. "The contract includes provisions for delayed timelines if military service requirements take priority. My captain understands your ultimate goal and respects it." Torres added his perspective. "My daughter has been training with Riley for 8 months. Her development from complete beginner to regional competition qualifier demonstrates the effectiveness of Riley's methods. When my department learned about Desert Tactical's youth program success, they asked how to implement similar approaches in our community outreach initiatives. That's another potential contract worth discussing." Morrison listened to the various proposals with satisfaction. A year ago, this facility was struggling with safety failures and discrimination issues. Today, we're discussing multi-year contracts and industry-wide methodology adoption. That transformation traces directly to Riley's capability and the program she developed. The afternoon brought additional recognition Riley hadn't anticipated. A letter arrived from the National Shooting Sports Foundation requesting her participation in a youth development symposium scheduled for the following year. The invitation described her as an emerging leader in tactical training education whose methods represented innovative approaches to skills instruction. Riley read the letter with Marcus beside her. This symposium includes instructors with decades of experience and national reputations. "I'm 17 years old teaching part-time while finishing high school. You're also the instructor whose students showed the highest average performance improvement in tracked regional competitions this year," Marcus said. "Your age doesn't diminish your contribution. Your capability earned the recognition." Sarah approached Riley after the afternoon session concluded. She carried a folder containing her college application materials. Riley had written a recommendation letter for Sarah's applications to schools with competitive shooting programs. "I got accepted to 3 schools with shooting scholarships," Sarah said, her excitement evident. "All 3 coaches mentioned your recommendation letter and my competition performances under your instruction. This opportunity exists because you taught me properly." Riley reviewed the acceptance letters Sarah handed her. Each school offered substantial scholarship amounts based on Sarah's demonstrated shooting capability. "You earned these scholarships through your own dedication and practice. I provided instruction. You executed the work. You provided more than instruction," Sarah said. "When every other facility told me I was too young or too inexperienced, you saw capability and developed it. That belief created opportunity one wouldn't have had otherwise." Additional students from Riley's program arrived to share similar stories of competition placements, scholarship offers, and recognition they attributed to her teaching. The pattern was consistent across different students with varying backgrounds. Riley's methods had created measurable outcomes that opened doors previously closed to youth shooters. As families departed and the facility quieted for the evening, Morrison found Riley organizing equipment for the next day's sessions. He wanted to discuss her long-term plans now that her 18th birthday approached and military enlistment became possible. "You've built something here that will continue without you," Morrison said. "The question is whether you want to delay military service to develop these programs further or proceed with your original timeline." Riley didn't hesitate. "Military service was always my goal. These programs prepared me for service and created systems that help other students. But the teaching was never meant to replace military commitment. It was preparing for it. Morrison had expected that answer. Then we'll structure everything to support your transition. Your curriculum is documented, your instructors are trained, and your methodology is systematized. The programs will continue and grow while you're serving. Marcus joined them as final students departed. Your mother would be proud of what you've accomplished. She believed education creates opportunity. You proved that principle applies to tactical training the same way it applies to academics. Riley secured the last equipment case. The desert tactical incident revealed capability I already possessed. The teaching revealed purpose I hadn't recognized. Both matter, but purpose has longer-lasting impact. They walked toward the parking lot as sunset colored the desert sky. A year earlier, Riley had been dismissed and excluded based on assumptions about age and capability. Today, she influenced training standards across multiple facilities, developed curriculum used by law enforcement departments, and prepared future military members through systematic instruction that prioritized fundamentals over assumptions. The transformation hadn't erased the discrimination she experienced or the casualties that resulted from safety failures. But the response to those challenges had created positive impact that exceeded the negative circumstances that prompted it. Riley had proven that capability demonstrated opens doors, while capability documented changes systems. Marcus drove them home through familiar desert roads. Riley reviewed notes for the military summit debrief she needed to complete and curriculum adjustments based on recent competition results. Her mind worked constantly on improvement and refinement, never satisfied with current achievement when enhanced effectiveness remained possible. "You taught me shooting," Riley said to her father. "This experience taught me that skill speaks louder than assumptions. Age doesn't limit capability. Expectations do." The best response to dismissal isn't anger. It's excellence that forces recognition. Marcus smiled at his daughter's synthesis of lessons learned. "Your grandfather taught me that same principle through different experiences. Each generation learns it again in their own context. You've learned it earlier than most and applied it more effectively than I did at your age." They arrived home as darkness settled fully. Riley had homework to complete, curriculum documents to finalize, and military preparation to continue. The balance between student and instructor, between developing her own capability and sharing it with others, defined her current existence. A year from now, she would be in basic training, beginning military service that had always been her objective. The teaching programs would continue without her direct involvement, sustained by systems she had created and instructors she had trained. Her influence would persist through methodology that shaped how facilities approach youth training and how students developed fundamental skills. The desert tactical incident had tried to exclude her. She had responded by changing the standards that enabled exclusion. Patterson had dismissed her qualifications without review. She had demonstrated capability that forced systematic recognition. The facility had failed safety protocols. She had helped implement enhanced verification that prevented recurrence. Every challenge had become opportunity. Every barrier had become lever for change. Every dismissal had become motivation for excellence that couldn't be ignored. Riley understood now that capability alone wasn't sufficient. Capability demonstrated, documented, and systematized created lasting impact that individual achievement could never accomplish. She entered her home carrying equipment cases and curriculum materials, already planning tomorrow's instruction and next month's program development. The journey from dismissed student to recognized instructor had taught her that assumptions about capability are temporary. Excellence documented becomes permanent. And the most effective response to being underestimated is building something so substantial that estimation becomes irrelevant.